Hi everyone, and welcome back to this series on how to do open source investigations from home. I'm Ben, and this is part 16, so let's get started. In this session, I really want to share with you my top 5 favorite tools in Google Earth. I hope that by sharing these tools with you that you find them useful in whatever subject you are exploring, whether it's for a hobby, research, or your job. What's so cool about this stuff is that it's free, just like these tutorials, and no matter who you are or where you are, all you need is a computer and the internet to do this stuff. So let's get started with my favorite number 1 tool on Google Earth, which is the historical imagery function. As an example to show this, I'm going to take you to the city in Sudan, Khartoum. Google Earth's historical imagery function, which is available in the downloadable browser version only, allows you to view historical imagery or previous satellite images that have been shared on Google Earth. By simply clicking this wheel that you can see up the top here, you can change the satellite view from what you would normally see on perhaps Google Maps or the standard view, which is from October 2022, and you can scroll back in time to view past satellite images. You can see the date up the top when I click backwards, and you can see that change. A good indication of that is the movement of the planes on the apron and tarmac that you can see on the screen here. This tool is extremely helpful in identifying changes on Earth, different objects at different locations at different times. For example, if I take you a little bit north of this location, we can see examples from some of the grim events that happened at the protests in Sudan. If we scroll back in time, we can see lots of little tents and marquees and buildings, which previously were not along this road before. In April 2019, we can see what appears to be people, tents, different areas. There's even more a month later. And then if we go forward, we can see that quite clearly here, and even up here as well. But then moving forward in July, we can see that that area has since been cleared of those tents, and those people are gone after a grim event happened here. This is the importance of being able to view historical satellite imagery and why it's so powerful in Google Earth. Another example that we can see is in Myanmar's Yangon. If we have a look at the city of Yangon, we know that in February 2021, Myanmar went through a coup and significant events unveiled around those dates and have since that event. If we move to those dates around that event, we can see some signs of that activity in the streets of Myanmar in Yangon. For example, previously this mural was not available on the road, but we can see pro-democratic slogans painted into the road along here. While we see those slogans there, if we have a look in other areas, for example, we can even see lots of people where protesters were gathering. You can see lots of them on the road along here and built up along here where the military had parked its vehicles, and you can see them on both sides. In another example, this time from Benghazi in Libya's east, we can have a look at the airport out near Benghazi and see changes. For example, I'm looking at satellite imagery from September 2022 of the airport here. And if we scroll back in time, going back through May, March, what we can actually see is In November 2021, we can see the military preparing for a very large parade. Here are the soldiers on the apron of the runway here, and we can see lots of vehicles lined up, more people over here. We can even see different types of vehicles as well. Some of them appear to be pulling boats, other ones over here, types of even darker vehicles and things like that. So you can see the power of being able to have a look at past satellite imagery as well as more up-to-date satellite imagery than what's generally available on Google Maps. And that's why this is one of my favorite tools on Google Earth. The second tool that I use a lot of, and I recommend other people use, is a ruler function. Very simple, but allows you to measure specific areas. So say, for example, I wanted to look at each size of these boxes. I could probably guess how big they would be just based on the satellite image. But what we have is a ruler on Google Earth, and I've clicked that function at the top there, and it allows me to select on the map a specific point and drag and have a look at a specific line. So this line that I've made in this box that you can see here is 10 meters or just over 10 meters long and appears to be just under 10 meters, so in between 9 and 10 meters wide as well. This tool is actually really helpful when looking at vehicles. So for myself, when I'm identifying planes on a tarmac, vehicles like tanks or vessels or ships, for example, this boat that's being dragged here is around about 10.6 meters. That allows me to verify just how large that might be and the model of that vessel or the model of that boat. Let's go to another location nearby here, but this time in Egypt, in a place called Sidi Barrani. Specifically, there's an airport just south of the town. By using the ruler, we can have a look at dimensions of things that we might not actually know what they are. For example, the Egyptian Air Force has a number of helicopters parked out on the apron here. And so we're able to take measurements to have a look at this helicopter, which is around about 16.5 meters long. But we can also have a look at, for example, the size of its propellers. We have a number of others here available. So for example, these much darker helicopters, a little bit shorter, around 14.5, 14.6 meters long. We could actually have a look on Wikipedia under the Egyptian Air Force and have a look at what helicopters they have to see if they match those dimensions. Furthermore, we can even have a look at much longer objects as well. For example, this runway is quite large and quite long. To measure it, we could simply draw a line right along the runway. We get that in meters, but we can also get that in kilometers. It looks like it might be a 3-kilometer long runway. I'm going to take you now to a location you're probably more familiar with, which is Manhattan in New York. Specifically, many of you are probably aware of the Central Park in Manhattan. We can actually have a look not only for the length of each side of that, which seems to be just over 4 kilometers, but we can actually measure the specific area of it. So for example, if I was to create a polygon, I select my corners, and we can see that the perimeter appears to be probably around about 10 kilometers. The area appears to be, we can do that in square kilometers, around about 3.4 square kilometers. Another interesting feature of the ruler is the fact that not only can you do a point measurement from one side of the park to another, being for 4.1 kilometers, but you can also have a look at the elevation profile to see what the elevation would be like. So for those of you that are into running, like myself, you can actually measure and identify where there might be nearby hills. So for example, there's different elevations. This one specifically, you can see that the elevation dips a bit, likely because you're trudging through water here at the moment. But with different elevation spots comes different areas. For example, for those runners that want to get those hills, you can find little climbs and things like that in specific areas. This is also quite useful for people that do long hikes, where you can draw a point-to-point measurement or a hiking route and have a look at that elevation profile, which is quite a useful feature. Moving on now to my third favorite thing about Google Earth, and it definitely has to be the 3D buildings. While there are a number of new mapping applications coming out with 3D buildings, we also have Apple Maps, Google Maps has really good 3D functions. My favorite type of 3D features are always in Google Earth, specifically because the availability of being able to pan around so clearly to any point of view that you want. This tool becomes super useful when people are geolocating content in specific cities where this is available. So for example, if you were to be looking at photos that have been taken from apartments over this main park area here, you might even be able to find what level they are taken on based on that elevation. You can also find some very difficult to see areas just by flying or driving up some of these streets and being able to peer into some of the sides of buildings to be able to match some of those views specifically. This is such a useful tool for anyone that is into exploring urban cityscapes, urban areas, or just wanting to have a look around specific cities around the world. But 3D imagery is not only available in main cities, it's also available in some of the other greatest features of the world, mountains. I'm going to take you to one of my favorite mountain ranges in the US, which is the El Capitan mountain. Given this mountain range is quite popular, so it's quite detailed when you have a look at some of its cuts and features in there. You can see some of the jagged rocks along here, as well as over the other side. You can see how well formed some of these areas are, even with this kind of little bit poking out right here. Other areas don't have that sort of capability and are not as detailed, but are quite useful to look at. For example, let's go to Kassala in Sudan. This area is likely less looked at than perhaps El Capitan or Manhattan, but equally has a 3D profile of its mountains, which is very useful for example geolocations in order to have a look at this rocky outcrop here. But you can see that even though there are jagged pieces on this, it seems to be quite well-rounded and not accurate of the jaggy pieces there. But still quite useful in referencing, for example, videos that may have been filmed from here or photos that may have been filmed from here, and to identify what angle they've been filmed at, to identify that exact location where they've been taken. Moving on from point 3, I'd like to share with you another really useful feature that I use a lot, which is image overlays. What I'm talking about here is adding images into Google Earth. So for example, here is Maxar's Open Data program, which allows free Maxar satellite imagery of specific events that have happened in the world, primarily disasters or environmental events that have happened. So for example, you can scroll down and start to view specific events like data on Indonesia's earthquake in 2022, Hurricane Ian, Fiona, flooding in Sudan, the Gambia, Kentucky, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and more activities, as you can see. Lots of these are available to freely download. There is a lot of satellite imagery available here from Maxar, which is very simple and easy to use. You can simply click on the information icon to see what satellite tile this place covers and what that image might look like, and then you can simply click download. To open them up in Google Earth is very straightforward. All you have to do is drag and drop. Google Earth opens up KML files, KMZ files, .geotiff and .tiff files, and you can open them up quite simply. For example, here is one that I've downloaded from Maxar, and you can see how clear that satellite imagery is, which gives an updated view of relief efforts after specific flooding came through an area. This is really useful to use as some areas just are not updated as much as others with satellite imagery, and it's very crucial to open those up. This sort of imagery is extremely important and such a very useful tool, especially in areas where satellite imagery is not as regularly updated as, say, for example, large cities. To show you what I mean by that, let me take you to a place in Myanmar where I have uploaded a planet satellite imagery tile. So for example, if we scroll in on this specific area and then open up this planet tile, we can see what this area looks like as of November 2022. This area was important as I was identifying or looking at and further analysing specific homes and villages that have been burnt to the ground. And we can see examples of this along here in these satellite images, where the remains of burnt homes can be seen in this satellite image in comparison to the previous one from 2021. By using these in Google Earth, it allows us to identify specific events that have happened, but in the wider context of a complete map. And this gets me on to the last point, which is probably one of the most important benefits of Google Earth, is the fact that you can annotate maps. So for example, staying with this satellite imagery that we have here, I'm able to annotate this map and draw markings on it. So for example, I can add a simple pin to say burned village. But what I can also do is even add a polygon to this area, just outlining the border of the area. I'm giving this a bit of color, making the outline red, and I can continue filling in this area. Now this is extremely useful because if you consider me doing this over and over again, it gives you an incredible insight into events that are happening on the ground and being able to capture the history of that with those annotations. Those annotations are not alone. You can also import and export data. So say for example, if I did this a number of times and I wanted to share this with an organization or a group working on Myanmar, I could export this file and send it to them so that they can open up the same data in their own Google Earth as well. But I can also import information as well. To import information, what we're looking for is things such as KMLs or KMZs. This is the type of file that opens up in Google Earth with all of the pins and polygons attached. So say for example, I wanted to look at active fire data in specific areas around the world. I've ran through this before in another YouTube tutorial, but we have something called NASA FIRMS, or Fire Information for Resource Management System. This is a very useful resource to allow us to collect data on heat signatures that have been picked up on the Earth's surface. And we can actually download those in a KML format. And you can see that the simple collection, it even says Google Earth KML. We have a simple collection of worldwide, Canada, Alaska, USA, other areas as well. I'm going to have a look at, for example, Australia and New Zealand. I can have a look at the last 24 hours of activity and simply just download a KML. So I've downloaded that KML And I'm going to drag that right into my Google Earth. You'll see that zoom to Australia, and already you can see those pins of fires. These are small icons that have identified where heat signatures may have occurred in Australia. And you can see there's a date on those. So this one was from the 1st of January 2023 at 0228 UTC time. And you can even follow up with more information on those as well. And you can see that there's more fires in the east in some of those greener areas in Australia. It's also important you should always verify this information as they might just be heat signatures given off specific areas as well. But this is just such an easy way to import that data. To have another look at a different type of data that you can import, it's very easy to search for a lot of this data. So for example, I've done a simple Google search and I've done a tutorial on how to do these simple file searches, but essentially you can just type in file type, KML, or even KMZ, which is Google Files, and your keyword before it. So I wanted to have a look at something to do with dogs and KMLs. And I found this really cool one, which is around locations of dog bins from Open Data Scotland. So I had a look at this one. I'll drag that into my Google Earth and we can see what sort of data that contains. So what I'm met with here is a number of pins from specific areas where there are reported locations of dog bins. So bins probably for dropping things like dog poo in. We could even perhaps verify some of these locations just by having a look at Google Street View to see if there's indeed one under this tree. And it might be the case that there is one there. So it's really useful to have access to that sort of information so that we can really understand a little bit more about our area, but also just gather that geospatial data that we usually wouldn't have access to, but now have. And that is one of my favorite tools to use in Google Earth. So there you have it. In this session, I've shared with you my top 5 favorite tools to use in Google Earth. These are ones that I use quite regularly, and hopefully you'll be able to use them too, or you'll find them useful in your research or your exploring. I really hope you enjoyed this session, and if you have any favorite tools that you use in Google Earth a lot, please leave them in a comment down below so that we can share them more with the community. And I'll see you in the next session.